One of the key characteristics of world-class players is bravery and courage. There are moments where you have to make moves that look silly and crazy, but they're the only way that you can guarantee your survival. And this game here by Fischer beautifully illustrates that. This is from My 60 Memorable Games, because Fischer reaches a moment where white is attacking him, and he decides to castle right into the attack. Put his king right next to all of his opponent's pieces. It is an absolutely stunning example of the bravery that goes into your decision making in chess. So let's jump straight in. Fischer has the black pieces. We reach a Sicilian position. Both players develop. It's not too crazy so far, although you do already see kind of the dynamic of the position. Black is going for some pressure and attack on the king side, on the queen side, and white is doing the same very aggressively on the king side. Now, bishop takes, we have pawn takes, a nice measure in order to essentially restrict some of these pawns, slow down this attack. If you take with the piece here, then you allow one of these two moves with tempo. White decides to go f5, which essentially stops any hope of ever going e5, but of course puts some quick pressure on this pawn here on e6. We have knight to e5, the queen comes to h3, and ladies and gentlemen, in this position, I don't think many would consider it a castle. You look at this queen, you look at these pawns, you look at the potential if white gets a couple moves to open up the g-file, and it looks absolutely suicidal to put your king here. But ladies and gentlemen, this is not only the move that Fischer made, this is the best move in the position and the one that gives black the best chances. Now, conceptually, here is sort of the idea. Because there's such a big pawn mass in the center, if white tries to go for an attack, black will have the sufficient resources to in some way open up and essentially simplify this tension in the center in such a manner that allows his pieces to come in to help. And you'll sort of see this concept a bit more clearly when we get into the actual attack. But, you know, irrespective of that, this is a crazy move. I mean, it's unbelievable. And it's really a stunning illustration of courage. Now, king to h8. First things first, safety. Tuck away your king so that when the rook inevitably lands on the g-file, the tactics have a less chance to work for white. And this is another thing that I think is important. When you go king h8, you don't need to see the exact position where this will help. You don't need to see the concrete combination or continuation. It is a conceptual move. You know that it will harm you if your king is on the g-file. It is better. It is almost luck, right? You'll have better luck if your king is on the h-file. And so making these small moves that give you a better chance of surviving is often really important, even if you don't see the exact way that they will help. Now, rook to g1 was played here. Some might be considering, what if we take? Well, remember what I talked about, where opening up the center is usually not good. It helps the defender get more resources. That's kind of what we'll see here. We take back, they can take, it doesn't matter. We can trade the bishops here if we want, or we can simply move the queen. It doesn't matter, but the point is that now the position in the center has opened up. The position on the 7th rank is a bit more open. There's just more kind of fluidity going on, and black has better resources now in order to maintain a solid defense and defend from certain attacks. So instead, rook to g1, adding up more pressure, it seems very logical, and d5. And again, this is what I was talking about. Because of all of the pawn mass here, you're going to be able to open up the position. And this is the critical idea behind the defense here for black. You open up the center in such a way that allows your pieces to sort of defend. For example, now you can take and open up the 7th rank. You can take with the bishop and maybe start counterattacking. You have flexibility in the way that you choose to defend. Now, in this position, we have knight to f5, jumping in, attacking the queen. Queen takes on e6, queen to h6. Now, with the move queen h6, it doesn't seem like there's a threat, but there is a very major one. And so, just for illustration purposes, if black plays a5, what move here wins on the spot? Rook to d8, a stunning resource. The g7 square here is very vulnerable, so if you take, there is mate, and if you don't take, we want to take and then mate you, and this is just, in fact, it's just checkmating in a couple more moves. Black, of course, saw this. Fischer plays bishop to d7 to defend and block the rook, and after rook to d6, knight takes g4. A nice defensive idea. If you take now the queen, there is knight takes h6, and you cannot take the knight because the rook hangs, and if the rook takes, you take back with the knight, a nice sort of defending your own pieces tactic here. So instead, after knight to g4, the rook took, and now the queen takes on f5, and you can see that by trading and simplifying the position, white's attack almost vanishes a little bit. In this position, we have rook takes rook, further trading. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here is a first critical moment that I urge you to pause and reflect. What move should black take here back with, the king or the rook? Now, Fischer took with the rook, but this is actually worse, and it comes down to the vulnerability of this f7 square. If you take with the king after rook takes on f6, you have the luxury of going queen to e5 because this queen is far better here. It already, eyes down this square and makes certain threats not possible, and you don't need to defend and look over the f7 square. Comparing this, when we take here, after rook takes f6, notice that now you can no longer come to e5 because then this rook captures. So it forces your hand, you have to come to d5, but now rook to d6 comes, hitting this, and this actually kind of forces a perpetual check. Now Fischer decides with bravery to not go for the perpetual check and go for the endgame, and indeed this endgame is roughly drawn, and there's definitely some more complications, and for example, here, if the king comes to f2, that loses because of rook to h1, and now how can you defend the pawn? You can't really defend it and also defend the bishop, so instead bishop to h3 was played. We have this check, we have the bishop coming to d1, white kind of goes in this endgame and tries to counterattack while black is playing for this pawn, so you have a clash of strategies, and ultimately, there weren't too many mistakes made. This is a draw, nice promotion here in order to take this pawn. It gets a little bit edgy here for black because, you're down a pawn, and this king is really active and your king is not active, but, well, now the king is cut. This pawn is weak. This pawn is weak. All of these pawns are weak. And indeed, the king simply comes in. You eventually take the pawn back, and, you can certainly explore this endgame a bit more for yourself, but this is a complete draw. They can take the pawn here, we come in, and the second we reach b7 with a rook on the board, it's a draw. In fact, in the game, black played king to b7, trying to be a bit tricky and kind of close down this rook, looking for this check and forcing the king even further out. But the king comes to d6 and then comes to d7 in order to always have the ability to wrap around and sort of stop this idea. The rook comes to h3, and again, I'm going very quickly through this endgame because it is a very simple one. Eventually, black notices the opportunity to trade the rook into the winning endgame because when the king comes in, we go king to b8, and wherever the king comes, we have the opposition that we can grab, for example, something like this, and it is drawn. So the endgame, you can definitely explore a bit more. I went very quickly by it because it is a draw, and frankly, white and black had many different ways to play this. It wasn't a very critical endgame. But I think this goes to show that defending is very much a conceptual thing. You might look at this position and say, oh my god, the rook is coming, the king is exposed on the g-file, this pawn is coming down, but you want to also look at the flip side. This takes a lot of time, and there is a big amount of chunk of pawns in the center that can allow for the tension to open up and allow us to essentially trade the rooks, trade pieces, and it's sort of this balance of conceptualizing the position. You can't calculate from this position deciding whether or not to castle if white can checkmate you in the next 40 moves, right? It's very difficult to calculate that. What you want to look at is instead the balance, right? How powerful is this attack by white compared to our quick resource with d5 to open and trade and open up the center? And similarly, can they swing the pieces in quickly enough? When they swing the pieces in quickly, how much of a threat is there? What different tactics are there? So when it comes to making these decisions, it comes down to conceptualizing the positions, looking at both sides, and frankly making a pros and cons list, and ultimately taking a risk by choosing one of those sides. So what I'm trying to basically say is that it's not a perfect science. You're going to make these mistakes, but as you get better, you get more practices with these different types of attacks, you'll get a better intuition and feel for the different plans and strategies for both sides, and you'll better understand whether or not attacks are bound to succeed or fail. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new around here, and like if you enjoyed and learned something new from it. I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.